Welcome to my YouTube channel. On this channel, we find facts and fine-tune figures. On this module, we are going to be designing our Medallion architecture using Dataflow Gen 2. So for Medallion architecture using Dataflow Gen 2, I'm going to create a new folder here. I'll call it new subfolder. I will call it bronze 2. I'll call it bronze 2 and I'll click on create. So once I click on create, this folder will be created for me. Then I need to upload those files into this folder. Now the file that we are going to be using for this is going to be the ones with header. So I'll click on upload and upload file. So once I click on upload file, I will then navigate into my local computer where I have those files with the header. So this is my Medallion architecture. So this is the exact thing that you have on your GitHub repository. So Medallion architecture, then under my sales data with header, then I'll pick all of this file now, then I'll click on open. So once I click on open, I'll click on upload also. So this will upload these 3 files for me. So once these 3 files are uploaded, I will then leave this interface. So I will leave this interface and then I will continue creating my architecture to ingest data to create Medallion architecture using Dataflow. So now they are completely uploaded. I will close this interface. So what I will do now is that I will switch to my data factory experience. So for my data factory experience, I can then create the silver layer. You know what we operated just now is the bronze layer. So the first thing first is that I'm going to create a data pipeline. So once I create this data pipeline, we then have to copy our silver layer just like the way we did it when we were using notebook. We are doing the same thing using just our data factory experience. So if you are coming from a background of low code, so this is an alternative route for you. So we can call this pipeline now um, medallion medallion pipeline. We can call it medallion pipeline. Then we click on create. So we need to move our data from our silver layer, from our bronze layer to silver layer. So once the pipeline is open now, by now I believe that we are all familiar with the interface of a data pipeline. So these are pipelines. So what we are going to be doing is going to be a copy activity. So we are going to be using copy activity. We are going to be using copy assistant. So I will use copy assistant now. Now my data source is in a lakehouse, so I will come to workspace. So of course my lakehouse is also in a workspace, so I will click on lakehouse, then I will click on next. So once I click on next, it's an existing lakehouse, so I will pick the lakehouse. Now we have about 3 lakehouse, so I will pick this Medallion lakehouse, which is the lakehouse where our bronze layer is located. So I'll pick Medallion lakehouse, then I'll click on next. So once I click on next, so it's asking me if they are files or tables. So I'll change this root folder to files. So I'll change it to files. So once I change it to file, then what I'll have on my explorer here will be different. So once it's loaded, I can now pick the folder where I have those CSV file, which is this bronze 22. Then I'll just wait to have a preview of what is happening with my data. Of course, you know what is there, but it is just good that we are double checking what we have there. So once this preview is loaded, then we can click on next. So we have a preview loaded for us now, and you can see that the schema has been picked, which are the column headers. So that is why it is important that you are using the sales file with header. Then I will click on next. So once I click on next, I need to define my destination. My destination, of course, is also a workspace and it's also a lakehouse within that workspace. So I will click on next. So once I click on next, is an existing lakehouse, and the lakehouse I'm using is this Medallion lakehouse. So for this Medallion lakehouse now, I will click on next again. So once I click on next, am I loading it as a table or as a file? Of course, I want to load it as a table. So these are all the columns. So I can just select all, and then of course all this table will be loaded for me. However, uh, you can see that the data type here are all string, which will not be correct for every column that we have in our data set, especially for this tax, unit price, quantity, and also the order date. This is the data type, and these are floats or decimal data type, but we are going to leave it as it is for now. We are going to be using our data flow to do that correction. So I will just click on next. So once I click on next, it's going to be saving my view for me, but there is something I need quickly to correct. I need to be able to give my table the appropriate name. So I'll need to give my table appropriate name. So I'll come back to my source, I'll come to my destination, then this is the name that I want my table. So I can just quickly name it now and call it silver underscore sales, and then I will now run my data flow again. So let me cancel this one that is done so that I'll get the appropriate name. So I'll cancel this. So now that I have given it the table the appropriate name, so this is the destination silver says. Now I can then validate this table. I can validate this table now. I can validate this table and I can see that it has been successfully validated, and I can now run it now that I've given the table the appropriate name I want. So I'll click on run. So I'll save and run. So this is going to ingest the silver layer for me. And then once the silver layer is ingested, I will then add a data flow activity into my pipeline. So but before that, once this table is completely run, I will check in my lakehouse and see if I have the table in my lakehouse. So my copy activity ran successfully. So I'll go to my lakehouse and see what I have in my lakehouse. So I'll just refresh this table and see what I have. I'll refresh this table and see what I have. You see, I now have sales silver, which is the one from from the copy activity, where the one from Swiss Silver is one from notebook, while Silver says is the one from the copy activity. So I can preview it and see what it look like. So we have our bronze layer, which is this. We have our silver layer for the data flow, which is also this. Now we need to use data flow to actually transform this into our gold layer. So we go back to our data pipeline, and then from our data pipeline, we can add a data flow activity. So I'll come back to my activity tab. Let me close this. I'll come to my activity tab and then I'll add a data flow. So on this data flow now, on this data flow, I'm going to link my copy activity to my data flow activity, that once this is successfully done, then I can initiate a run for this data flow activity. But for this data flow now, we need to configure it appropriately. So I'll come to my setting tab. Then of course I am creating a new data flow. So these data flows are the ones that are already within our workspace, but they are not appropriate for this work, for this use case now. So I'm going to create a new data flow, and then I will connect into my lakehouse where I now have that data table as my silver layer. So once my Power Query is up, I can then rename this first things first. So I'll rename this to data flow uh, medallion medallion. So once that is done, then I can now go and get my data, which is my silver layer, because we are using this data flow to ingest our gold layer. So I'll click on get data. Once I click on get data, where I want to get my data from is on my lakehouse. So I can click on more. So once I click on more, then I can come to view more sources. So from here I can click Microsoft Fabric. Then I'm getting it from a lakehouse. So I click on this, and of course there are so many lakehouses in here. So I can click on next. So once I click on next, it's going to navigate into the next screen. So on the next screen, I'm going to scroll down into the workspace where I have my data. So I will pick the I'll pick the lakehouse, which is the entire lakehouse, and expand it. Once I expand it, then I will pick that data table, which is the sales silver. So once I pick that now, I can then click on create. So once I click on create, it's going to take me to the back to my Power Query view, where I can now use this to create my gold layer, So to create my gold layer, I'm going to be duplicating all of these table into different ones. So one for my products, another one for my customers, another one for customers, then another one for for date, another one for date, another one for date. So I will duplicate this. So once I have them duplicated, so I will just rename this one. I will call it dim customers. Then this one too, I will call it dim products. And lastly, this one too, I will call it dim date. So these are the dimensions table that we have, and of course this is going to be our fact saves now, no longer saver. It's going to be fact saves for fact save. So now we have that available. So can now get to work and create each of these table. Now it is important to know that when you are creating your data model, your dimension table always have non-duplicate values. They have distinct value. So for the customer side of things, I will remove every other column apart from the customer name and also the email. So I can just right click. So once I right click, then I have this interface, then I can remove other columns. So I have just my customer name and my email. So the next thing I want to do is that I want to make sure that none of them is duplicate. So I can just come here, I can either right click, I can come here. So once I'm here, I just click over on this guy right here. I can right click. So once I right click, I can then remove duplicates. So the duplicate will be removed already. So this way now we know that every name that we have on the customer table is unique. So the same thing apply for their email. So you can see that 12,387 customers are here. So that's that for customer ID. But another thing I want to do first is that I want to also duplicate my customer name column. So I will just duplicate this column first. So once I have it duplicated, then I also want to split them so that I can have my first name and my last name. So I will split my column on the delimiter. So what delimiter am I using to split? So I'm going to just pick on space so that I can now do OK. So once that is done, I now have a column for my first name and last name. So I just have to rename this now and call this uh first name. Then I'll rename this one also. I'll rename this and call it last name. last name. So I will name it and call it last name. So now I have it as last name. So one more thing before I leave this place for customer table is that I need to create a column for my customer key. So how do I achieve that? I can come to add column type right here. Then I can come to index column. So I can start from 1. So if I click 1 now, so I'll have an index column. So it will just number it from 1 to the last number here. So I can then rename it my as customer key. So I'll name it as customer key. I don't know, there's a glitch going on that is not making it to show. So customer key. So I'll click it again to be sure is the name appropriately. Sorry, my network is actually messing up. So customer key. So now we have the customer key. So we are done for the customer table. So the next one we want to do the same thing for product table. So I'll come to my dim product table. So I will remove every other column apart from my item, which is this, so which is our product. So this is the only column that speaks to product in my table. So I will remove every other column. So I will right click on this guy and remove other columns. So once I remove other columns, then I have this. So the next thing to do is also to make sure that they are all unique. So I'll click here. I also right click again, then I will remove duplicate. So once I remove duplicate, then I have distinct value for all of this. Then I can come to my add column again and then add index column. So then I will click from one also. So it's going to give me an index. So what I will do next is to rename this index column. So I will double click here and then I can call it a product key. So I'll call it product key. So now we have created our dimension customer table and also our dimension date table. So to dimension product table and dimension customer table. So we are going to do the same thing for our dimension date table. So to create a dimension date table, we only need this order date. So I will remove every other column by right clicking and remove other columns and leave just the order date. Now again, our order dates must be unique. So what I will do is to also right click once more. So once I right click again, then I will remove duplicates. So once I remove duplicates, I now know that all the rows that I have in my order dates now are unique and they are also distinct. So let me just expand this. So now that I have unique dates and I have unique dates, so another thing I want to do is that I want to make sure that this my data type is in date data type. So I will change this to date data type, change this to date data type. Then I'll go back to my fact sales table also. I'll go back to my fact sales table. So my fact sales table too, I will make sure that uh, my data type are appropriate for the columns that I want. For this quantity column, it should be a whole number. So I will click on this. I will change it to whole number. Then I will come to unit price also. I will also change it to decimal in this case. Change it to decimal number. Then my tax too, I will change it to decimal. So I will click on this also. Then I will click on decimal. Then the only column that is left for me is my order date. Though I will also make sure that it is also in date data type. So once I have this done, then I can now go back to my date table and complete it to have other columns like months, year, quarter, and all those columns that will make it a complete date table. So I'm going back to my date table now by clicking this. So I have my date table. So, but to complete this date table now, just to make things faster, I've actually provided the M language in my GitHub repository for this course that you can copy. So you can go to your GitHub repository now and then you can go to Medallion architecture folder. Right here, you will see this text document where you see the M language. So I have done most of this other transformation. So I just needed to add this part of the code that will add the column for me. So I'll just copy from this last one and copy up to this place. So once I copy this, then I will go back to my fabric environment. So in my fabric environment now, what I will do is that I will come back to my home tab and I will go to advanced editor. So in my advanced editor now, I can just come right here, which is right here. Then I hit on enter, then I can paste the code that I copied. I can paste the code that I copied. But to be sure, you need to make sure that this line here must be the exact same name for the last step apply, which is line 8. So this will not be appropriate now. So in this case now, you are going to change this. You are going to take out this and then you just add the last apply step, which is this one, change column type. So I'll do Control C, then I'll come back here, then I'll just paste that. So once that is done, then I can now remove this one. I can remove this guy because the last apply step here is change column type. Then I can remove this one now. So I'll remove this one because the last apply step here is change column type one. So I'll remove this. Then once that is done, I can now click on OK. So this will create my date table for me, but I'm running into some error now. That's because I didn't add comma to this one. So I'll add comma now and then I'll click OK. So this should create my date table for me. So once my date table is created, now I know that all my dimension tables is now complete. So I have my order date, I have year, I have month number, I have months in full, months abbreviated, quarter, and also date of the week. So as a way of cross-checking, I have my fact table, I have my fact table, I have my customer table, I also have my product table, and I have my date table. So but before we continue and load this data into our lake house, we need to quickly add the foreign keys from our customer table and our product table to our fact table so that we will be able to create that semantic model in our lake house. So to do that, what we are going to do is that we will come to our fact table right here. So from our fact table side, we are going to do a merge query. So we come to combine. So from combine, you come to merge query. So we are going to be merging based on customer name, and then we'll pick our dimension customer table also. So once I pick dimension customer table, I'll pick the name too, and then I can see the estimate of the match. You can see that all of them match each other, and I'll click on OK. So once I click on OK, then I have to expand that step. So on that step now, you see dim customer table. So I'll click on this double directional arrow. So what I'm expanding is going to be the customer key, so that there will be corresponding customer key on our fact table. Then I'll click on OK. So now I have a customer key on my fact table. So we repeat the same step for our product table too. So I'll come to combine once again, then I'll come to merge query. So once I come to merge query, I can then pick uh item. I will pick item, then I'll pick the second table in this case, which is going to be product table. Then I'll also pick item. So I will be waiting to estimate the match. So it is now complete also. Then I'll click on OK. So now that I've click on OK, I'll wait for this to come up. Then once it's up, I'll expand this, and then I'll also include only my product key. So I have a corresponding foreign key for my primary key in our dimension table. So I have customer key and I also have product key. So now that I have created this, then we need to remove some other columns from my fact table. So we no longer need our customer name here, we no longer need the email, and we also no longer need the item. So I can now right click and then I will remove all these columns. So what we have now is a fact table and their corresponding dimension tables and their corresponding dimensions table. So the last thing to do now is to make sure that we specify the destination for each of these tables. So I'm going to click on add to destination. Now this can be any of our destination, but in this case now our destination is a lake house. So we'll pick on a lake house, and then once I pick on a lake house, I will click on next. So once I click on next also, it's going to take me to the screen where I will specify the lake house I'm taking my data into, which is within my fabric course. So I'll scroll down to my Medallion lake house. I will click on Medallion. I will click on next. So once I click on next, then I have all of these uh, column for me, and I can see that they are in the appropriate date type that I want them to be. Then I can save setting. I'll repeat that for all the other tables. So I will do for customer table too also. So I'll click on customer table. I'll add it to destination lake house. I'll click on next. Then from there, I'll navigate into the lake house within my fabric course workspace. So once I do that, I'll pick the Medallion lake house again. Then I'll click on next. So that will pick that lake house for me. But I can see that there are some issues here, and the issue is because the naming of the column has to be with an underscore. Spacing is not allowed. So what we can do is to click on fix it, which will automatically just add the underscore for me. Then I click on save. So that has specified the location for this customer table. So I will repeat the same thing for my product table. So I will add to destination. I will click on lake house. So lake house, also click on next. Then from next, I'll also navigate into my workspace, which is a fabric course. Then I'll expand and pick my Medallion lake house. Then I'll click on next again. Once I click on next, then I'll click on save settings. Click on save settings. Then I'll pick my date table this time now. Then I'll add to destination lake house. Now next, and I will navigate the workspace where I have my lakehouse, which is fabric course. I will expand, pick Medallion architecture, and then click on next, and that will be it for all of them. So I can click on save settings. So the destination has been specified for all the tables that I have in my data flow. Just a quick check, I can just check them once more to make sure that everything is intact. So I have my fact table, I have my customer table, I have my product table, and I also have my date table. So the destination has been specified, so I can now publish my data flow gen 2. So once this is published, I can expect to have all this good layer of the table in my lakehouse. So my data flow is going to be loading. So you know that we now have a lot of items within our workspace now. So but you can actually filter them right here. So if I just want to see items that are just data flow, I can click on this. So I have Medallion data flow. So this is loading now. So while this is loading, we just give it some time, and then we go into our lakehouse and see if I now have the tables in my lakehouse. Our data flow is done loading, so we can go to our lakehouse now and check what we have done, if it has been properly ingested. So what we can do now is to, you see, for unidentified. So I will just click here and I will click on refresh. So dear friends, we have been able to create Medallion architecture using the notebook as available from the documentation, and also using our data flow gen 2. So depending on you, depending on what is convenient for you, you can use either data flow gen 2 or you can use your notebook, whatever one that is available for you. What is important is that you can create your Medallion architecture. Thank you. So before we call it a wrap, you can just inspect all the tables that we created using our Medallion architecture. So this is dim customer. I can click on it, and then you see all the columns. You see this is for our dim customer table, and we can also check our name date using data flow. The ones that we created with notebook are the ones that have gold, and when we created with data flow are without gold. So this is dim date also. You can see the date table, and then you can also check for products, and also you can check our facts table too. So this is our facts table. So you can then do the same semantic model that we created earlier, but since we have done it, it's not necessary. So thank you, friends.